Good morning, my students. You are welcome to this online class. My name is Chukwuje Okaf, and today I'll be your virtual tutor. I'll be taking you in mathematics, and the subject and the topic of our discussion, will be quadratic equation. The topic of our discussion today will be quadratic equation. By way of definition, a quadratic equation is a second-degree polynomial, which means that the highest power of the variable will be 2. Now, the general form of a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. Take note that a, b, and c are all constants. And again, the variable x could be anything. It could be y, it could be z, but in this case, we are using x as the variable. Now, the objectives of this study, it is expected that at the end of this class, every student should be able to define a quadratic equation, recognize factorable quadratic equations, apply the factorization method, find the roots of the quadratic equation, and then verify solutions obtained. Before we continue, let me bring to our notice that there are 3 forms of quadratic equation, which are standard form, vertex form, and factored form. However, in this class, we'll be dealing with standard form of quadratic equation in this class. Okay, let's proceed with the standard form of a quadratic equation. Just like I said before, the general structure or general form of a standard form of quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, where a, b, and c are all constants. Now, x squared is called the first term, x is the second term, while c is the constant term. A typical example of a quadratic equation is 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 equal to 0. Now, x squared is the first term, 3x is the middle term, while minus 5 is the constant term. All right? Methods of solving a quadratic equation. There are basically 4 methods of solving quadratic equation. Again, let me remind us, while in the course of this class, if you have any question to ask, feel free and stop me, and I'll give you opportunity to ask your question. Okay, we said there are 4 methods of solving the quadratic equation. Those methods are, number 1, factorization method, number 2, using the quadratic formula, number 3, completing the square method, and number 4, graphical method. All right? Again, for this class, we'll be looking at only the factorization method. Okay, when you are given a quadratic equation to solve using method of factorization, first thing to do, look at the first term of that equation. If the first term of that equation is 1, the next thing you do is to look at the constant term, and then look for 2 numbers whose product will give you the constant term, but whose sum will give you the middle term. Now I say look at the first term. If the coefficient of the first term is 1, then you look at the constant term and look for 2 numbers whose product will give you the constant term, and whose sum will give you the middle term. Okay, now if you get those 2 numbers, the next thing to do is to replace the middle term with the sum of those 2 numbers. Replace the middle term with sum of those 2 numbers. Now, to explain it further, for you to understand, let's look at a typical example of a quadratic equation. In this case, we've been asked to solve this equation, x squared minus 5x plus 6 equal to 0. solve this equation using factorization method. Here, if you look at the first term here, which is x squared, its coefficient is 1. So the next thing to do is to look at the constant term, which is 6, and look for two numbers whose product will give you plus 6, but whose sum will give you minus 5. In this case, those two numbers are minus 3 and minus 2. So, because if you multiply minus 3 with minus 2, you get plus 6. But if you add minus 3 and minus 2, you get minus 5. So the next step is to replace the middle term, which is minus 5, with minus 2 minus 3. And if you do that, what you have will be x squared